What type of signaling uses pairs? Okay, I'm going to go to 613 and then down the bottom. What type of signaling uses pairs of audio tones? Okay, so this actually has what are called DTMF tones. So if I just push my button here, let's see if I can. There's my repeater. Whoops, I didn't mean to hit that. Let me go to just a regular frequency that's not in use. Okay, so that one's not in use. So if I push function and the number 1, let's see, let me change it. That's not it. So they're just like telephone codes. I can't do it right now. But anyway, it's 0 through 9 plus the star and the pound key. So those are called DTMF codes. Just like you would push a phone in the old days, you would hear doo, 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 doo. Well, they use those codes to tell the repeater what to do. So let's say it's a regular repeater mode. You just talk with the tone and it just starts rebroadcasting your voice. Now let's say for digital mode. So there's a couple different digital modes that are in systems that are nice to know about. One of them is IRLP, Internet Radio Linking Protocol. And what it does is it'll take, say you have a handheld and you're talking to a repeater here and it's connected to the internet. So it takes your signal on voice and transmits it digitally through the internet to another part of the world, let's say Australia. It goes through the internet over to Australia and it pops up over there on their repeater and it converts it back into voice. And so it appears like you're talking on the radio to someone in Australia when really what you're doing is you're going from your handset to the repeater through the internet back up to their repeater through their handset. So you might have a guy in Australia driving on the back roads in repeater range and you're talking to him driving down the road, and you could do the same thing driving down the road in Utah. And it's using IRLP. But before you talk to somebody, you would have to key the repeater and dial a code. It might be 123456 star 123456 pound. And when you do that, the repeater says, oh, 123456, that's my magic code to turn on the link. And it turns on the link and it'll say, okay, link activated, and what node do you want to dial? You might dial node 9876 and that might be Australia. And you'll say, okay, and you dial the node with your codes, you hit pound, and it says, okay, I contacted it and it's linked. And then after that, it starts linking, and then everything you say is going to be transmitted and received to Australia. So some other guy in Australia driving down the road might pick it up, and he might be talking to you in Utah, and he has no idea that the repeater is linked and the link is activated. And so you may or may not know that you're talking to someone in another part of the world, depending on what software and linking systems are in place. Most of them are designed to time out after 5, 10, 15 minutes of not talking. So you might dial up and activate the link, be driving down the road, and you go out of range and you can't turn around. And you want to, if you know you're going to go out of range, you want to deactivate the link and turn it off. But something happens and you don't want the link to stay active, so the software will disconnect after a timeout period. So the first question is, what type of signaling uses pairs of audio tones? It's DTMF codes. Then there's what's called for digital mode, there's what are called talk groups. I haven't used, it's called DMR, digital radio. They have a code, like a talk code, and they have colors like red, green, yellow or something. They're like, okay, I'm on this code yellow or code red or blue, and that's just like a number that you put in, and then that's the talk group, so you can talk to people on that same group. And so they call them color codes. What is the purpose of color codes used on DMR repeater systems? They're to know the code to dial into a group. What function is performed with the transceiver in a digital mode hotspot? Okay, so let's say I want to go digitally through the internet, but all I have is this. Well, you have what's called a hotspot device, where you hook up to your computer and your computer goes through the internet and it converts my signal here to the hotspot through the internet. So it links radios through the internet. So and they might use something like IRLP or D-Star or some other method. And how are they selected? They call them plugs. I haven't used them, but that's the answer. It has to do with they call them plugs, which are like sets of frequencies and codes for a given talk group. T4B11, which of the following must be programmed into a D-Star digital transceiver before transmitting? Okay, so you have to put in a call sign. So you have to put in your call sign, and you have to register on the D-Star network. And that's really the question. But I haven't successfully done a QSO yet on D-Star, but I watched a little YouTube video on it, about 5 minutes, and they say there's 4 things you put in for D-Star. Your call sign, who you're calling, so it's from and to, and then you put in the repeater that you're connecting with. So it'll be the call sign of the repeater. Like let's say the repeater was N0AH, and then it'll be a code like A, B, or C. I think C is VHF mode and B is UHF or vice versa. So you put in call sign N0AH space B or space C, depending on if it's a VHF repeater or UHF repeater. And then the third thing you want to do, if you want to do locally, you only need those 3 things. If you want to do to a gateway, like say somewhere in Australia, and you want to use D-Star repeater here in Utah to connect to a D-Star repeater in Australia, you would put in the gateway. So you would use N0AH space G for the gateway, and you put in those. That's the 4th thing if you're going to go remote to another location. And you can call a station directly by putting in their call sign, or you can do CQ at the other end, and then that will just tell anybody, I want to talk to anybody. So that's about all I need to know for that test question, is what do you have to do is just put in your call sign. I gave you a little bit more, but okay, so T8C06, how is over-the-air access to some IRLP nodes accomplished? It's through dialing in those digit codes. And there's directories, and there's an online website. I think it's irlp.net, if I remember right. And you can go and see what nodes are out there throughout the world, who's active, who's talking. You can do check-ins and see who's actively talked recently. And it's pretty fun. I did it years ago when I was in Denver and ended up talking to people in Australia and UK and Britain and South America and South Africa. And it's really fun. It's free, and you can really learn a lot. What is VoIP, voice over internet protocol? That is converting your voice into digital and going through the internet. And what is IRLP? I've just talked about that. It's just a way of linking repeaters through the internet using VoIP. The next question on 614, and they have a little diagram of that here on 614 at the bottom, describing what I just tried to say. Which of the following protocols enables an amateur station to transmit through a repeater without using a radio to initiate the transmission? So that is called Echolink. So Echolink is, they have what are called dongles, which is just a little thing you plug into your USB, and you plug that in, and it lets you transmit through your computer audio, voice. And you have to put in your call sign and register. But once you do, you don't even need a radio. You just need an Echolink dongle to plug in, and that's the system. That's the protocol, is Echolink. You have to register though and put in your call sign. That's the next question. What is required? T8D02. What is a talk group on a DMR repeater? It's just a shared channel to talk on. And apparently they use 2 digital voice channels on 12.5 kilohertz of bandwidth in order to talk for DMR, which is digital mobile radio. So they have some examples here in the middle, or down about first paragraph or 2 on 614. IRLP, I've talked about that one, Echolink, D-Star, and then DMR, and there's also one called Wires. It's Yaesu. So if you have a Yaesu radio like this one happens to do digital. It does Wires X. I've never used it, but apparently you can do it. So that diagram there at the bottom of 614 kind of describes that. And then there's the hotspot diagram on 615. It's a similar concept. It's kind of like, think of it as a Wi-Fi router connecting to your mobile phone. So if this was your phone, you're connecting through Wi-Fi, through the internet. Well, it's the same sort of thing with ham radio. You use your radio, which is like your phone, talking to a hotspot, which would be like your Wi-Fi at home, going through the internet out to a repeater. And those are called reflectors. So there's an IRLP reflector, an Echolink reflector. It just listens and then echoes your signal and transmits in that area. So let's see. Oh, so for D-Star, it's only equipment manufactured by ICOM and Kenwood. And for Wires X, it's Yaesu. So in my area, there's really not. I think there's maybe one Wires repeater, and I don't even know how to use it. I haven't tried it. But there's lots of D-Star ones. So I would recommend D-Star right now if you're going to try digital modes. I would recommend an ICOM or a Kenwood. I have a Kenwood for my mobile, for my car, and then I have a Yaesu for my handheld because I really like the handheld. This particular Yaesu does digital, so I can push and talk if I hit digital mode. It's kind of like just like your cell phone. It converts the analog signal into digital, transmits it, and then comes out digital. So you don't get static at all, but it may drop in and out. So it's called DV mode for the Yaesu, and the ICOM has the same thing as digital mode. But if you listen in on it, it'll just sound like a bunch of like computer tones because it's digital. So the advantage to that is it's kind of like, nobody can listen in on your conversation unless they happen to have the same equipment and the same protocol. The downside is, not as many people can talk to you because they would all have to have the same type of radio. 616. Let's see. Got 10 minutes about. Okay, nets. 616 nets. We're going to talk about nets. It's section 6.4 on page 616. Okay, so a net is useful for either just talking on a particular subject, but it's particularly useful in emergencies or for big events like a race or a marathon or something where you have lots of people gathered together and you want to coordinate checkpoints or something. They have what are called a net. So there's an emergency net, let's say, in your area. And there's two types of nets. That's 618 and tell you about two different types of nets. There's a RACES, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, and there's ARES, or Amateur Radio Emergency Service. So the ARES networks are networks of ham radio people that are licensed, that have gone through specific training for emergencies, and you can communicate with civilian or authorities in a national emergency. Let's say there's a wildfire in your area, and the firefighters come in and they say, hey, we need you to help get out the message, get out the word that everyone needs to evacuate. You might be activating the ARES network and talking to people or neighbors or whatever, and you're communicating with the firefighters, the police, that kind of thing. That's ARES. RACES is just more non-governmental organizations like Red Cross or something like that in like a local emergency situation. So those are two types of nets. Now a net in general, let's say you're a member of an emergency group in your area. They might do a net, let's say, first Sunday of every month at 9 p.m. or something. They pick a day, a time, and a repeater. They get on and they talk. And so they will activate the net. Sometimes they'll activate the repeater and put in a code that puts it in net mode, which kind of eliminates some of the delay and some of the other things that will help facilitate the net. It may even get rid of the little beep or something at the end. So they put it in net mode and they talk, and there's one person who's the net control. So he's, like in the era of D&D, he's like the dungeon master, right? He's the control guy, and he says, okay, this net we're activating the net on this repeater, and we operate on this time and this frequency, and here's the purpose of our net. And now I'm asking for check-ins, and so he'll say, okay, anybody want to go ahead and check in? Call in now. And so someone will say, okay, my name is KC0QZS, my name is Adam, and they will give usually their location. And sometimes if they have traffic just means a message for the net. I have traffic or I don't, and that's it. And then you go, okay, and he'll acknowledge you and say, okay, I heard KC0QZS, Adam in Salt Lake or wherever you're at. Next check-in, and they'll do the next one. Now, if it's a small group, like 3 to 5 people, you can just do it that way. If you have 10, 20 people or something, you might want to have an organized way of checking in. You might do it by call sign. Call signs, letters A through P, check in now. Call signs Q through Z, check in now. So you might say beginning of call signs. You might do it by geographic location. I was in a net in Denver once, and it was based on quadrants. So if you're east of I-15 and north of I-70, you're in this quadrant, check in now. If you're in this quadrant, check in now. And you go around clockwise or counterclockwise and get a list of check-ins. So I was on a net once and it had like 40 check-ins. So it might take 20, 30 minutes just to check in. And then you go out and say, do you have any traffic? And each of these areas throughout the Denver area would say, okay, I'm good, or I've got a problem, I need water, or I need food, or I need this person, or I need medical. And then you'll say, okay, I hear you. And then the command station will say, okay, this check-in, you guys need this, you need that. So it's a way of coordinating response and communicating messages. So the duty of the net control station is to check in and control the operation and bringing the net up and down. The term traffic just means messages. And what is standard practice when you participate in a net? The practice is to check in with your call sign and communicate as minimally as possible. So you say your name, your location, whatever you're being asked to say in your call sign, and then you just listen. And the only time you want to interrupt or whatever is if you have some emergency or if you have something to add to the conversation. Generally, you wait for the net control operator to acknowledge you before you talk, because otherwise the net's not going to be very useful. So, all right, next page 617. This is a little illustration of a radiogram. It's kind of like a postcard size way of communicating. I don't know if they use this in more of digital or Morse code, or if they just do it manually over like voice or whatever, but they will do these in emergency situation or whatever or they do this for contests. They fill out this card. So there's like a number, like card number 1, message number 1. And then you have a precedence or priority. This is high priority, low priority, traffic, or medium. So they know like they're going to process, just like if you go into the ER, they're going to triage someone who's bleeding, they're going to talk to first, or someone who's got a headache or whatever, they can talk to them later. So it's a priority of the message. And there's the station of origin. So I would start by saying my call sign, KC0QZS, put that. And then there's a check, which is in computers, they call it checksum or CRC. It's how many words is in your message. So if I say there's 10 words and I only got 5, then I know something happened with the message. I didn't hear it, there was interference or something. So you do a checksum, which is a number of words. And then where you're trying to contact, the time and the date. And then it'll say 2, which is like location, address, phone number, and then the words that you want to say. I think this one, by protocol, they have 25. So they're like, why do you want to only say 25 words? Well, short and sweet, just keep it to the point, helps the net operate efficiently, and then who it's from. So in this example, they have 10 words: need more cots and sanitation kits at all 5 shelters. So I need more cots and sanitation kits at all 5 shelters. 10 words, you've said what you need, and you say John Smith, shelter manager. And you have the date, the time, number 207, it's a priority, and that's pretty much it. So that is what's called a radiogram header. So what is meant by the check in the radiogram header? That's a number of words. What technique is used to ensure voice messages containing unusual words are received correctly? That's the phonetic alphabet. So you may have heard this in military: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Tango, Delta, A, B, C, T, D. So it's a phonetic alphabet. That's what you use to help, because some words like C and Z, or T, D, they sound similar. So if you say Charlie, Tango, Delta, you know it's CDT, not CDT, CTD, or whatever. So it helps you understand and communicate better using the phonetic alphabet. What is a characteristic? Which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling? Well, it's message integrity, like making sure that your message sent is the same one that was received. What is contained in the preamble of the traffic message? So that is the first part of this little postcard size datagram, which is like your number, your precedence, your to and from call sign, date and time. That's the preamble. It's kind of like we would call them packet headers in computer science, but it's the header of the message. Okay, 6-18, I've already talked about RACES and ARES, Civil Emergency Service, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service is RACES, and ARES is Amateur Radio Emergency Service. It's used for Non-governmental organizations like Red Cross, fire, police, that sort of thing, emergency response, and to coordinate things in a disaster. And just like military, you want to drill and train before the disaster. So you might want to join a RACES or an ARES network before, so you understand how to respond in an emergency and get practice. 619, when do the FCC rules not apply to the operation of a radio station? Well, when there's a threat to life or property. Okay. The next question, are amateur station operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privilege of their license? Yes, they are. If it's a threat to life and safety, you can communicate on whatever means is available to you. Even if you don't have a license on it, if you got equipment sitting here, you can talk. And you don't have a call sign, it's okay. You can talk to save life or property. But once the emergency's over, you're not authorized anymore. So they give you an example of, let's say you're in an ARES network and you're testing a fire department. You're over there talking to them. Well, once the event is over, you're not allowed to use the fire department frequency to just kind of chat and talk about ham radio in general. The event's over, you're not authorized to be on the fire department frequencies. Okay, so tactical communication for convenience. If let's say you got 3 stations, they give an example here of a command post 3, school kitchen, and judge's stand. They use tactical call signs like that. You still have to use your regular call sign. I might say KC0, QZ8, QZS, I am the school kitchen. Then afterwards you say school kitchen. But you still, every 15 minutes, you have to tell your call sign. But for ease of communication, you might use tactical call signs like your location. Now, during an event, there might be 2 different ham radio guys that come in and out at the kitchen. So people are just knowing, I'm talking to the kitchen, but they hear your call sign every 15 minutes, but it helps communicate and facilitate communication. Distress calls, probably everyone knows SOS. The 2 things you need to know in Morse code is the letter S and the letter O. S is 3 short, dit, 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 and O is 3 longs, da, da, da. So, dit, 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 da, 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 dit, 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 da, da, da. That's S-O, S-O, S-O-S. You can just keep repeating that if you're in an emergency. So you need to know SOS. On voice mode, you might even say Mayday, 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 Mayday. You repeat it 3 times. There's another one called Pan, Pan. That's more urgent, not emergency. So distress calls, if there is a distress call, you want to pick it up, listen, and try to facilitate until help arrives to the station in distress, whether that's land, sea, air, whatever. There is an international marine distress frequency calling, 2182 apparently. I don't think that's a test question, but they mentioned that on 621. Let's see, they have some things about your employer. 622.21, you're not allowed to accept payment for ham radio communication, so just don't do anything commercial. Try to sell stuff, or try to interact with your employer while you're talk about stuff dealing with your business while you're on ham radio. Okay, 622, the International Space Station. This is where it gets exciting. Okay, according to this, there is a listening. You can listen to the International Space Station and communicate to them on 145.8. You can just listen there if you want. Their call sign is kind of like NAS, NA1SS, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. That's the International Space Station's call sign. Apparently they have an onboard bulletin system, an FM system, and digital, and they can talk on 2 meter and 70 centimeter. So anybody who's got a ham radio license is licensed to talk to the International Space Station, apparently. You probably want to learn more about that if you actually want to try it. There's probably schedules and protocols to follow, but you are authorized to do that. So the question is, which amateurs may contact the International Space Station? Anyone who's licensed. Oh, and by the way, some of these things may receive on 10 meter or 6, or some other meter that you don't have access to, but it doesn't matter because you're just listening. You're not transmitting. As long as you're transmitting only on VHF or UHF or frequencies you have authorization to, you're fine. So let's see, 623 Oscar, I've talked about that. This book says over 50 satellites since 1961. I was looking today and they have 121 Oscars that have been launched. So the number's gone up quite considerably since the publication of this book, apparently, or they didn't count it right. But there's over 120 amateur satellites orbiting that you can have access to. And they have subbands listed on table 6.4 here. the frequencies that are there where you might listen in. So we're almost done. I got 2 more pages and we're done. So what is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? Anything 50 kilometers or more above the Earth. Okay, so anything 50 kilometers or more above the Earth is defined as a space station. What is a satellite beacon? So a beacon is where it transmits information about the health and welfare of the satellite. It might transmit its position, its temperature, voltage, different things like that. What is a Doppler shift in reference to communications? So that is the change in frequency. So there's light shift and there's, well, light because it is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves are the same. Even sound is a form of that. So if you're familiar with, let's say you listen to a motorcycle down the road, it comes towards you and then it passes you and goes away. That is Doppler shift. When it's coming towards you, you hear, and when it goes away, you hear a low sound. It goes from high to low. That's Doppler shift, from high to low. So it shifts and it changes frequency, slightly up, slightly down, depending on if the satellite is coming towards you or going away. So you have to adjust your equipment a little bit to know about Doppler shift. The next one is what causes spin fading of satellite signals. Well, like I mentioned earlier, the satellite is rotating in space mainly because it's like a rotisserie oven and it doesn't want to get too hot on one side of the chicken. Okay, you don't want to get the satellite too hot and burn up the solar panels. So it has to rotate till it cools off on the dark side and then heats up on the warm side, and it has to keep going as it rotates around the Earth and as it rotates around while it's in sunlight or sunset, or they call it eclipse. So what causes the spin fading of the signals? The satellite's moving through space. It's rotating. There's 2 terms of a satellite. One is called attitude and one is called ephemeris. Attitude is the position in space while it's in orbit, and ephemeris is the position around the Earth, where it's at on the Earth. You don't have to know either of those, but you do just have to understand that it is rotating. Many of them are rotating. What is a LEO satellite? That's low Earth orbit. I've mentioned that. They've got a diagram of the satellite, so you're contacting point B to point A on this diagram. Because of the curvature of the Earth, you wouldn't be able to talk directly unless you're talking up here to the satellite and back down. So it allows you to communicate over long distances. The satellite could be as near as 500 miles, or it might be as far as 2,000 miles. So it just depends on where in the 15-minute cycle it is at, as far as if the signal is going to be strong or weak. 624, tracking a satellite. Which of the following are provided by satellite tracking programs? Location, trajectory, and frequency shift. So they'll tell you those 2 or 3 things: where it's at on the rotation, what trajectory it is, what direction, and what's the shift of it, Doppler shift, frequency shift. What are inputs to a satellite tracking program? It's called a Keplerian element, or KEPS. If I remember, Kepler was like a 1500 scientist or something who figured out this idea of frequency shift. Anyway, Kepler element, they're also called 2-line element, TLE, or Kepler element, KLE, KEL, or whatever, but they're just like a couple of numbers that define the orbit of the satellite. So you put in these numbers, these Kepler elements in it, then you can put it into a program and it will know exactly where the satellite is and it can simulate it. What telemetry information is typically transmitted by satellite beacons? So I mentioned that earlier. It's health and status. Like it might say, I'm up, I'm transmitting, I've got my timer on every 15 minutes. It might say I've got this temperature and this voltage. So it's telemetry information is health and status. What is the impact of using excessive radiated power on a satellite uplink? Well, I don't know exactly because I haven't done it, but I think it has something to do, it says in here in the book that it has something to do with your battery and your power. So I think what it does is if you're transmitting on high power, it's going to retransmit high power. If you transmit low power, it transmits low, I think, because it's going to impact the battery and the power of the station. So you don't want to overpower the uplink because it can like drain the battery or tax the satellite. So you want to use the minimum power you need to get the job done. And that's just a good best practice, whether you're using a repeater or simplex or anything. It's kind of like talking. You don't want to talk louder than you need to when you're standing right next to somebody. You talk a little softer. What mode of transmission is commonly used by amateur satellites? SSB, single sideband, FM, and CW or Morse code. So those are the three modes: voice, FM radio, FM, and Morse code. What is meant by the statement that a satellite is operating in UV mode? It's upload UHF, download VHF. That's UV mode. Transmitting on one frequency and receiving on the other. Who may receive telemetry from a space station? Anyone. You can get it. It's publicly broadcast. It's kind of like a call sign. Anybody can listen to it. Which of the following is a way to determine whether your uplink power is neither too high nor too low? So you know the story of Goldilocks. You want it not too hot, not too cold, but just right. The way you can tell is if your transmission is about the same as the satellite's transmission. So when you transmit, if you hear about the same amount, you know you've got it just right. So kind of listen to trying to get the same satellite. Oh, here's a funny thing. So I mentioned satellites are called birds, right? In 624, towards the bottom, it says, when you're ready to try a satellite contact, it's known as squirting the bird. Squirt the bird. You'll get the best results with a beam antenna. You can aim at it. So you're going to kind of move the antenna and aim at it as it goes. And I think that's it. So thank you for joining me. Tune in next time and we'll be talking about the fun world of licensing regulations. Thank you for listening in.